Hello everybody, this is David. Welcome back to my channel. This video is the next in our series, The Christian Ethic in the 21st Century. And we're currently looking at the Christian view of pleasure. And in the last video, we looked at the kind of society, the kind of world into which the Christian ethic first came, and that was the Roman Empire. And in this video, I want to have a look at the principles of pleasure and see if we can lay down certain principles by which pleasure can be judged. Now we can approach this from two different angles. We can approach it from the negative angle, and we can lay down certain principles on which certain things have to be rejected, and we can approach it from the positive angle, and we can lay down certain tests with which a true pleasure must satisfy. So in this video we're going to be looking at the negative angle, and we're going to be looking at what constitutes things, pleasures, the rules, the principles by which we can reject a certain pleasure. So if you're ready, let's continue. So firstly, no pleasure can be right if its effect on the person who indulges in it are harmful. There are pleasures which can injure a person's body and which in the end can have a permanent ill effect on their health. There are pleasures which can coarsen a person's moral fibre. There are pleasures which can weaken a person's character and lower their resistance against that which is wrong. Now, any pleasure which leaves a person less physically fit, less mentally alert, less morally sensitive is wrong. Now, there are obvious instances of this. For example, the excessive use of alcohol lowers a person's power of self-control and renders them liable to do things which they would not have done if they had been sober, if they were in control of themselves. The taking of drugs and stimulants can end in a person leaving with them with a physical or mental wreck. Overindulgence in eating and drinking can leave a person a burden to themselves, with their physical fitness seriously impaired. Promiscuous sexual relationships can leave a person with the most tragic of diseases which will not only ruin their own life, but can be passed down to any children they might have. So one of the simplest tests of pleasure is, what does it do to the person who indulges in it? If it is actively harmful, or even if it has a built-in risk in it, it cannot be right. So secondly, no pleasure can be right if its effect on others is harmful. There are pleasures which can result in the corruption of other people, either physically or morally. To teach others to do wrong, to invite them to do so, or to make it easier for them to do so, cannot be right. It is no small thing to teach another person to sin. And there are those people whose friendships does us a mischief, if we could put it like that, use that phrase. So it is precisely this that Jesus unsparingly condemns, as we read in the book of Matthew chapter 18 verses 6 and 7. Whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him to have a great millstone fastened round his neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea. Woe to the world for temptations to sin, for it is necessary that temptations come, but woe to the man by whom the temptation comes. So if Jesus is right, it is easier for a person to be forgiven for his own sin than it is for them to be forgiven for the sins which they taught to others. Now, a person may have a certain right to ruin their own life, but they have no right at all to ruin the life of someone else. Now, a person always needs the first impulse to sin, true. That impulse will often come from within their own heart, but almost always it needs someone else to push them to turn the inner desire into outer action. And tragically, often the wrong thing can be given a false attraction. For example, to take drugs can be painted as adventurous and free. An illicit relationship can be presented as a beautiful friendship. Experiment with things which experience has proved to be disastrous can be looked on as the assertion of freedom. So to lead or persuade or seduce someone else into any kind of conduct which is hurtful and harmful is a grave and terrible responsibility. So thirdly, a pleasure which becomes an addiction can never be right. The formation of a habit is one of the most terrifying things in life. The first time a person does the wrong thing, he does it with hesitation and with difficulty. Think of the first time you drank a pint of beer, or the first time you smoked a cigarette, for example. There are many forms of self-indulgence which are actually unpleasant when they are first tried, but which in the end can become a tyranny. They rule over us. The second time the thing is done, it will be easier, and so on and so forth. The initial unpleasantness will give way to pleasure, and the day will come when a person discovers that they cannot do without it. It has become an addiction. One of the old Greek sayings said that there were only two questions about any pleasure. Firstly, do I possess it, or am I possessed by it? Secondly, do I control it, or does it control me? The minute a person feels that some pleasure is gripping them in such a way that they cannot do without it, they will be well advised to break it before it breaks them. Now, addiction can happen with quite ordinary things like tobacco. It can happen with more serious things like alcohol. It can happen with drugs, so that a person becomes hooked on some drug, the slave of the evil thing. It is better to have nothing to do with a pleasure which is liable to become an addiction. It is essential, the moment that we become aware of the growing addiction, to stop. Fourthly, a pleasure is wrong if to enjoy it, the essentials of life have to take less than their proper place. A pleasure can cost too much, even if it is a good thing in itself. For example, a person might be interested in football, but the time and money that they spend on it could be that that time and money should have gone to their home and family. A person may practice a public generosity, for example, which leaves too little time for his own home. For example, becoming a scout leader or leader of the local football team, for example. It may be that we are so active in the service of the community, youth work, for example, even of the church, that we have no or too little time left for our own family, our wife, our husband, and our own children. Anything in life that gets out of proportion is wrong. Whenever any pleasure includes or grabs hold or takes away time and money which should have gone to things and to people in life of even greater importance, again, your wife, your husband, your children, then however fine it is in itself, it is wrong. So fifthly, any pleasure which can be a source of danger to others must be very carefully thought about. Now here we are back at the Apostle Paul's insistence that he will eat and drink nothing which might cause his fellow man, his brother or his sister, to fall into error, as we read in Romans chapter 14 verse 21 and the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 8 verse 13. He will put an obstacle in no man's way, as we read in the book of 2 Corinthians chapter 6 verse 3. Now this is not something on which we can lay down definite rules and regulations. It is something for each person's own conscience to decide within the context of the life that that person has to live. But a person is a selfish person if they insist for their own pleasure on that which may ruin their brother or their sister, the person next to them, in other words. So, sixthly and finally, we will end this series of principles with what is the most far-reaching test of all, and that is the ultimate test of any pleasure is, does it or does it not bring regret to follow, and that pleasure which brings regret is wrong. Now, Epicurus was one of the very few philosophers who declared that pleasure is the supreme good in life. And we use the word Epicurean to describe a person who is a devotee of pleasure. But to be honest, when we do that, we do grave injustice to Epicurus, for he always insisted that it is essential to take the long view of pleasure, that it is essential to ask not what does it feel like just now, but what will it feel like in time to come. Epicurus believed in a diet of bread and water, for such a diet has no ill consequences to follow. In other words, simple food. He believed in justice, in honour, in honesty, in chastity and purity, faithfulness. For only when life is lived in these things are there no regrets. Epicurus believed that if you do make pleasure the supreme good in life, you must take the long view of pleasure. So this is the final guide. We must always ask, not simply, will I enjoy this at this moment, but also, how will I feel about this in time to come? This even the most prudent person in the world will ask, but the Christian will ask not only what the thing will feel like in the time to come, but also what it will feel like in eternity to come. And if that is true, the supreme test of pleasure is, can it bear the scrutiny of God? We'll end the video here, and in the next video we'll be looking at the positive view of pleasure. So I want to thank you for joining me in this video. See you on the next one. Bye bye.